Focus stacking is one of the most important techniques that I use in my photography. I often like to incorporate foregrounds, whether it's cool rocks or logs, mud cracks, wildflowers, list goes on. The reason that I like to focus stack in my photography is I like to have everything within the frame as sharp as I can possibly get. Now there are times where you do want bokeh or things out of focus to draw the eye through the image, but in many cases, my personal style is to have everything as sharp as possible. And there are different softwares that you can use to accomplish a focus stack. The most important thing is obviously getting this done in camera. And so that requires you to focus on the closest thing within your frame to the actual lens, whether, like I said, it's a flower or something else, and then progressively stop forward with your focus so that the entire scene is in focus. Now, I use primarily Helicon Focus in my workflow to actually achieve the focus stack. They have some really powerful software. That being said, if it's a more simple scene, then I often just use Photoshop's focus stacking tools, or I do the focus stack processing in Photoshop manually. Really depends on the scenario. Like I said, wildflowers are often more tricky because you have a lot of different depths of field within the foreground. You might have a wildflower that's really close to you, but then you have the grass and some of the other items there that are at a different focal length, so it can be a little bit more challenging. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to show you how to do it both manually and with Photoshop itself. So let me show you how I achieve this within Photoshop. Okay, let's take this photo as an example. You can see we have 3 different frames here for this focus stack. You can see the change slightly in the zooming. That's what we call focus breathing, and it's how the lens changes when you change focus. And so this first one, we can kind of look and see what is in focus. You can see some of these salt formations are nicely in focus here, but if we zoom in, the mountains here are completely out of focus. If we go to the other frame, for this one, you can see the mountains and the further salt cracks are nicely in frame. Now I shot this at f13, and at 14 millimeters, so we have pretty good depth of field, but if you go here, you can see that the close formations are out of focus. And then the third shot, here we can see those salt cracks in the close range are nicely in focus. So this is great. We have everything that we need to focus stack. So from Lightroom, I do a lot of my organizing in Lightroom. It is a great catalog. I do some of my editing, mostly adjustments, always do my lens corrections and remove my chromatic aberration. And I often do select enable profile corrections. Gets rid of some of the vignetting and distortion that is in camera. And you can see I dropped my highlights all the way. It was pretty blown out. I also bracketed these shots as well. So you can see I have the information for my sky to complete the edit. But for now, we're just gonna go over the focus stacking. So now that I have these 3 frames, I'm going to select all 3 of them, right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. All right, so here we have all of the 3 layers loaded. I just want to organize these. So let's see what this one is. It's a little out of focus up there. This one is focused kind of in the mid ground, if you will. So I'm just gonna organize, let's deselect. This one is focused. This is our further focusing. I don't always do a good job of this, but I try to name all of my layers. Just helps me when I have 10 to 20 or more layers. Now that we have them organized, hold Shift, click, and select them all. Then we go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. Keep this as auto, press OK. Photoshop will do its magic to align all of these. You can see it did a pretty good job. Now there are some exposure differences here, but that's okay. We can obviously modify that as well. I'll be right back since Ajax is now eating. All right, so now that Ajax is done having a midday snack, we'll continue the video. So now that we've auto aligned these layers, we're gonna go up back to Edit, auto blend layer, and then keep it at stack images. You can also do a panorama. We're just gonna stack them right now. I like to check seamless tones and colors. If you have any major gaps, you can also select content aware fill transparency areas. I'm going to crop in just a little bit, so I don't really need to use that. And then we press OK. So let's actually see how well Photoshop did at this focus stack. So we know that this is far, but selecting somewhat for these mountains, you can see right here, we've gotten a bit of an issue. There's a little spot, I don't know if you can tell. It's a little blurry right there, definitely blurry right here. Maybe that's the spot, yeah, that's the spot we just saw. You can see some blurriness up here as well. Generally speaking, I don't like to rely on Photoshop to do the stacking. I don't think it's all that reliable. I mean, this is a pretty simple image and it got some things wrong. Now, I could have adjusted the sharpness before and maybe that would have helped, but I usually don't rely on Photoshop to do my focus stacking for that reason. So let me show you how instead to do it manually. So we're gonna undo that. And again, so we know that this is far, and honestly, because it was F13, we have pretty good focusing all the way down except for the bottom. So honestly, I'm going to deselect the mid area. We don't have to be super precise with this one because of how in focus a lot of this is. So I'm just going to go over here to add layer mask, click it, and I often like to invert my masks for whatever reason. So now you can see that you can't see, but this layer is completely invisible because this is a black mask. So what we're gonna do is go over here, make sure that we're in our brushes, so B, then make sure that we have a white brush. So you can either click this or you can press X. So now that we have a white brush selected, I'm gonna go all the way to 100% opacity. I'm gonna bring the hardness down to 0, increase the brush size, and paint back everything that's in focus. All right, so now that we're done that, what I'm going to do is try to blend these a little bit better. So I'm gonna go over to a curves adjustment layer, hold Option, click to link them. Now you don't actually have to link them in this case just because the close exposure is, or the close frame is on the bottom. Just out of habit, I always link my layers that I am trying to make an adjustment to. So if we just bring down the exposure just a little bit, you can see how well that blended those two together. I brighten it just a little bit, trying to nail that exposure, but that's overall pretty good. And so if we zoom in on the mountain, you can see made a big difference. So that's pretty much how I do my focus stacks. If it's a simple image, I try to take at least 3 frames moving progressively along. There's kind of this give and take. So if you shoot at, say F16 or even F22, yes, you're gonna get a greater depth of field, but you're gonna lose some sharpness in it. Now you can recover some of that in post-processing, but typically you wanna get as much in camera as possible. And so that's why I try to shoot between F8 or 11. That being said, I shot at F13 here just to give myself a little bit more depth of field. And this is a simple focus stack. So let me just really quickly show you what a more complex focus stack looks like and why I use other software. I'm not gonna dive into a tutorial on how to do that one, but just so you can get an idea of how much more complex it can get. Okay, so here's a shot that I took in nearby Crested Butte about a week ago now. And wildflowers inherently are more challenging than, say, a salt flat or even mud cracks. You have things that stand up in the air, so it creates a difference in depth of field. You can see these flowers are in focus while the background here is completely out of focus. So an actual manual mask is next to impossible, just because, again, we're talking about the lens breathing as you change your focus, as well as movement of flowers. And with flowers, often you're also combating wind and light. So all of these things, you don't want to bump your ISO up too high, but you do want to freeze the flowers if there is wind. So flowers can be particularly challenging to shoot and then even harder to stack. So if we actually look at this photo or this focus stack, this was at f8, which is still a pretty good depth of field. Certainly isn't f22, but if I was at f22, I would have to be at some crazy high ISO. I'm already at 400 ISO to get myself at 1/30. The wind wasn't too bad here, and so you can see there's not a ton of movement, but you can see how much worse it would get if I was at, you know, f16 or f22 to create a better depth of field. So we can see how many stops are going on here. I went over maybe forward about 4 or 5 stops. So these flowers are nice and sharp. These are no longer sharp. And the mountains are completely out of focus still. I have to go ahead quite a few frames to get sharp mountains. And when the mountains are sharp, the flowers are completely out of focus. And it just creates almost an impossible workflow to try to focus stack these manually. And Photoshop is just not there. It's not a focus stacking specific program. So that's why I use Helicon Focus. It does a really good job at this. I've edited a couple of shots so far from Wildflowers, and it did a phenomenal job, even handling like a focus stack of 10 to 20 different frames. But there you have it. That's how I focus stack within Photoshop for simple ones. And if you do want to get into more complex photos like this, and you want everything to be sharp, including the background details, so that if you do blow it up on a larger print, or if you're just fairly, I guess, OCD about your photos being sharp, you're gonna want to actually rely on a software like Helicon Focus. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully you will use this within your photos. Let me know if you do want me to do a tutorial on something like Helicon Focus. I will be releasing full-length tutorials. We'll go over focus stacking, compositing, light bleeds, dodging, burning, everything to make this photo what I want it to be in the end result, including probably showing some of that Helicon Focus stuff. But I might do a quick YouTube video on it. It's pretty powerful, pretty easy to use. But yeah, if you did like this video, please drop a like. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful, or if you have any other questions, techniques that you'd like to go over. And if you're not subscribed already, please do subscribe. Helps me out a ton, and we'll see you in the next one.